Hey guys, welcome back to the CX500 Rebuild series. Today I'm going to be removing the engine from the frame, so we're going to start off by stripping the frame completely, which starts with removing the exhaust here. And you can see I'm just kind of pulling the exhaust out right now, and it's super rusted. This thing was absolutely terrible, and I almost got tetanus from it. Thankfully I got my booster though, so I'm all good. Now next we're on to removing the clutch cover. I did this, I was removing the oil in this process, and I did this all out of the all out of order. But essentially right now I'm removing the clutch cover because I wanted to look at the actual clutch itself and see what the status of the engine internals were. So I started off just by taking this cover off, and that's why there's so much oil in there still. I should have drained the oil first and then removed the clutch cover, but I was so eager to get inside there, I had to just remove the clutch cover. And so far, everything inside the engine looks really good, so I was really happy. But here I am actually removing the, draining the oil now. I just removed the oil bolt, drain bolt there. And you see the oil is pretty dirty looking, pretty black, so it is definitely a good thing that I'm changing this out right now. And then finally here for the oil change, I'm removing the oil filter. This is a different oil filter than I've seen before. You remove this little cover piece, and then inside is the oil filter. So it's different than other bikes I've worked on. But you can see there, I just flashed it really quickly. While we're here, I might as well change it. And next we're going on to, we're continuing to strip the frame. And so I'm removing the front brakes from the bike. The front rotor is a little bit rusted. But the brakes themselves, the brake calipers, are still in decent condition. So here I am, I'm using the breaker bar to remove the brake calipers from the frame.
Now, hopefully there's no brake fluid in there, and it looks like there might be.
And there was some brake fluid inside the lines there, so I had that little bucket there, little cup to collect all the brake fluid, and I just basically drained any brake fluid left in the system, and then I continued to remove the bolts.
But let's see. Damn, not too bad. Not too bad actually. And those pads look pretty new. Very thick pads.
Now I will be changing those pads, even though they do look pretty new. They're still 30 years old, so I'm going to be changing those out for new pads. New brake pads that have probably better friction coefficients and better specs than what we had back in the day. Here's just a little close-up of the handlebar, just showing how all of the chrome has essentially rusted. This is chrome plated handlebar, and it's not chrome anymore, so that will be cleaned up later. Now we're onto the electrical system. So essentially all I've done so far is I've taken off the front headlight, and that's revealed all of these cables, all of the wiring. And I tried to take mental notes of where everything connects on the bike. And now I'm just disconnecting, inspecting and disconnecting all of the cables behind the front fairing here and behind that front headlight. There's a lot of cables here, and it's very important to kind of notice where they are routed and what they're for, because some of them are for ignition, and others are for other things.
Alright, so the front fairing is off. And I did not pay attention to where anything was coming from, so these wires will be a lot of fun to reconnect. All these here. This design is actually pretty good. It's like how I would design this. And it's pretty much just like, let's just fucking toss all the fucking wires up into the front and then cram them into the fucking headlight behind the front headlight. So it's not too complicated. It's just a lot of fucking wires and knowing where they all go. And there are wiring diagrams for the CX500, but it's like, come on, if you ever looked at those, it's like staring at a fucking 100 lines, all like different like little colors, and I'm slightly colorblind, so. Now I think these wires used to have some of these wires, I can tell, used to have some like labels on them, like for these connections, but they've all pretty much fallen off. So these types of connections are like, it's gonna be guess and check / trying to figure out the diagram slash asking ChatGPT for troubleshooting advice, because I've actually been using ChatGPT a little bit for this, just for like some ideas and coming up with troubleshooting stuff, and it actually does help pretty well. So the future right there. But I'm just gonna untangle all of these wires. But yeah, I mean, getting all this stuff off. What I want to do is I just want to kind of document where everything is from the engine, because I'm planning on taking the engine off the bike soon, and I just want to have a video record of where everything goes. So off the bat, we have these here, one on each side. We have, just for the bolts, I have already marked out the pattern and labeled them. This very crude diagram here. So 9 bolts, not 9 bolts total, but actually into the engine. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So it's technically only 5 bolts that go into the engine itself, but there's all these, you know, there's these 2 bolts up here and these 2 up here. There's also, at the transmission here, behind this dust cover, is a screw or a bolt. And so you can undo this here. And from what I read online, you just put something underneath, undo those bolts, undo that transmission bolt, and then slide the engine back and then drop it down off that, slide it off that transmission.
So now we're on the actual stage of removing the bolts that hold the engine in place. So you see me on both sides of the bike here, little magic here, and I'm removing some of the bolts that go into the engine. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts, I believe, that actually go into the engine itself, and the rest of the bolts go into engine mounts or engine hangers, which are these various brackets that hold the engine in place. But in this process, it took about, I would say, half an hour, and I'm essentially just going back and forth onto both sides of the bike to actually remove the bolts that hold the engine in place. And obviously these bolts need to be removed so I can take the engine, so I can drop the engine down and then work on the engine and also get that frame powder coated. So just a little compilation here of some of the work I put into this. Once again, it wasn't too difficult, it just was time consuming, going back and forth across the bike in the garage. It was a little cramped in there, so going back and forth took a little bit of wiggling. Now I'm on the final, I'm working on removing the final bolt from the engine, and you see I'm using the hammer and the screwdriver to kind of hammer the final bolt out. This last bolt was a little bit rusted, and it was kind of stuck in the frame and in the engine, so that's why I had to use the hammer and that screwdriver to get it out. Eventually though, the bolt was removed, and I am showing it here very briefly. That's like the one long bolt it goes through. It's one bolt that goes through both sides of the engine. And now I'm looking at the dust cover that connects the engine to the drive shaft. This is a shaft driven bike, and so it uses a shaft instead of a chain to transmit the power and the rotation from the engine to the rear wheel. And so right now there's a little dust cover, and I'm pulling the dust cover back, and I'm trying to get the shaft from the shaft to disconnect from the engine. There's a little spline on the engine from the transmission, and that essentially meshes with the drive shaft. So right now I'm just trying to get the drive shaft removed from the engine so that I can lower the engine off the frame. In this sequence here, you can see I tried a lot of different various methods here. So right now I'm trying to like pull the frame off the engine. That did not work. That was dangerous to do. I could have broken my foot there. So I continuously just kind of lower and raise the engine, and you see that I just removed the bolt. That's the bolt for the spline for the clamps onto the engine itself. But I basically, in this step, I continued to raise and lower the engine, and eventually I was able to, you'll see any second here, I was able to push the spline of the drive shaft onto the engine and then pull it off. And that essentially allowed me to disconnect the engine from the drive shaft. So right now I'm lowering the engine, and that's because it's fully disconnected from that drive shaft. That was the tricky part of this. Everything else is pretty simple. You see right now I stopped lowering because I'm disconnecting some more cables. I believe these are throttle cables that are just kind of wrapped around the bike, kind of wrapped around the frame. So I'm getting all of those disconnected. And all of the wires I'm disconnecting at this stage, I'm trying to label. So I'm putting some blue tape on various wires and cables. And that's going to be important for the rebuild when I'm reinstalling the engine and reconnecting everything. Because a lot of these connections are very hard to tell where they go. So it's very important to label where everything goes. And that will just make everything easier for the rebuild process. So I'm just still looking over the engine, disconnecting everything. There's a tube that goes from the radiator to the coolant reservoir, and that's a reservoir coolant overflow tube, I believe. So that tubing is still connected, and I'm going to disconnect it soon. So just disconnecting more tubing, more wiring, and that engine is essentially freed from the frame. All in all, it was a pretty simple process for the first engine removal I've ever done. Probably took like 2-3 hours total, which is honestly not too bad compared to how complex other bikes are. And now I'm just moving that frame from the engine because I'm gonna have to move the engine onto a stand so I can work on it later. So right now I'm just moving that frame from the engine just to give me that space to lift the engine up. Not to flex, but I did lift the engine myself, and I lifted it and moved it onto a filing cabinet that I have in the garage. This is just a random thing I have in the garage I can use to kind of work on the engine with. So you can see right now I'm just lowering the engine on that engine lift stand, and I was just nervous that the engine would fall over for some reason, for just some random reason. So here I am lowering it, positioning the engine just to make sure it doesn't fall or anything. And I could not help myself at this stage because I just needed to look over the engine and I had to clean it. The engine, the radiator, the frame, everything at this point was so dirty and disgusting. I had to clean some of it. And this is why I bought the bike, is to clean and restore it. So right now I'm just dusting off. Look at that. And just look at how much dust comes from that. Look how dirty that is. This is the satisfaction I get, is cleaning the engine, cleaning the frame. And just like magic, the engine is on that filing cabinet. I'm just showing off the corners, the various sides of the engine. There's a lot of oxide layer, a lot of oxide still on the engine. This is aluminum engine. There's a lot of oxide on it. And flash forward, I have the front radiator removed from the bike. You can see it's draining in that bucket there. Now you can see the fan more exposed and a lot of the other things hiding behind that radiator. And I'm just kind of going over the bike here, showing off more of the more detailed viewing of the engine. This is the back of the engine, a lot of various things going on here. Coolant pipes, head covers. That'll be for later. But now I'm on to the frame and stripping the frame from all of the electrical components. Right now you can see all of the electrical components that are left on the bike. I removed everything from that front headlight, from the front fairing, and now all that's left is the various electronics in the back of the bike. So there's a couple of dangling cylinders, maybe you can see black cylinders, and those connect to the spark plugs on the bike. So essentially all that's left on the bike right now is some various some fuses, as well as a voltage converter and the spark ignition system. So this bike uses a CDI ignition system. I don't quite know what that means. However, right now I'm removing the CDI ignition box, which you can see in the middle of the screen there, which I'm pulling out now. And that box is essentially, I think it gives spark or ignition to the spark plugs depending on the rotation of the engine. So that's kind of what I'm removing right now, just all of the electronics, and there it is. That's essentially the frame fully stripped of the electronics. There's one wire left, and that's for the ground for the battery, and that's still tied into the frame, which I will remove later. But next, we're onto the front of the bike, and now we actually need to remove the front forks. But before we actually remove the front forks, we want to crack loose the top nuts on each fork. These forks are rusted and definitely need a change in oil. So we're going to completely rebuild the front forks. Now you see I'm trying to remove that nut on top of the fork. It's a lot easier to remove the nuts when the suspension is mounted in these in the steering column or the triple mounts or triple clamps. You can see I'm fine. I was able to crack loose that left side front fork, and next I'm on the right side front fork. And this was a little tricky to crack, but this is very important. And you see I eventually cracked that nut, and I loosened it just a couple turns. Now I'm just kind of slightly pushing out the suspension. I'm just getting it ready to remove. I don't want to remove them yet because I'm still working on the rear end. So here I am on the rear of the bike. And the first thing I need to remove is this brake system. I had to use the hammer here, and I kind of hammered off this linkage. This linkage here is the linkage that actually engages the rear brake. And so you see I'm pulling it out slightly from the bike here, and it wasn't coming out all the way because there was some other things on the other side of the bike to remove. I can begin to take off the rear wheel. First, I'm going to crack loose this one bolt on the left side of the bike. This clamps down the rear axle onto that swing arm. So first I'm removing this bolt completely, and then I'm going to loosen the axle from the other side, and then just simply hammer out the rear axle. So now I'm just using that mallet there, and I'm just hammering out the rear axle there, and you can see it slowly coming out on the left side of the bike. And once I got the rear axle removed far enough out from the wheel itself, I was able to just grab it by my hand and pull it out the rest of the way. This is a pretty simple process. I used some WD-40 just to get it a little more loose and lubricate it a bit more. But you can see here, I got most of it. I got it off most of the way, and now I'm hammering the wheel off of the swing arm. Remember, this is a shaft-driven bike, so the rear wheel essentially meshes with the transmission or the gearbox on the rear of the swing arm there. So to remove the wheel there, once that rear axle is actually off, you essentially just need to slide the wheel to the left to pull it off the splines from the swing arm. You see now the support bracket there is still attached to the brakes, so I'm removing that. And now the wheel can just be rolled out. Just like that, very simple. Now I actually prefer working on, shaft-driven bikes rather than chain-driven. And this kind of shows it. I can get the rear wheel off on this bike in like 5 minutes now that I've done it a couple times. Super fast, very convenient, I must say. And there's no slack adjustment, which I absolutely love. You see there's that little kind of washer spacer piece that goes on the rear axle, and I'm just putting it back on the rear axle so I don't lose it. That's going to be very important for the reassembly. Next I'm on to the rear suspension. With that wheel out of the way, I can actually remove the 2 rear shocks back here. These are completely rusted out and going to have to be changed. But actually removing these rear shocks is pretty simple. It's just undoing 2 bolts and then just sliding the suspension off of the frame. This left side shock I'm removing right now was pretty easy to remove. It wasn't stuck on or anything. Everything just slid off without much effort at all. And here's a little close-up of the actual shock. You can see how rusted it is. I don't feel safe using this. And I already have replacements, so we will be tossing these out. And onto the right side. Same process, just removing 2 nuts. But on this right side, I'm not sure why exactly. It was almost rusted on to the frame. So this took a little bit more time, a little more effort to remove. But it's still nothing too bad, nothing I can't overcome and solve here. Once again, using that mallet, just malleting the top and bottom, going back and forth so I don't bend anything. And just hitting it once more, and almost there. And there it drops down. Now I was lucky here. If my foot was underneath that swing arm, I could have crushed a toe. And I really want to avoid breaking a toe on this build, so I need to be a little more careful. And with all the parts, all the hardware I take off this bike, I always make sure to install it back where I got it from. So just putting these nuts back on the frame here, just so I don't lose them. It's a very important process, very important. You see I'm lifting up the swing arm up and down just to see how it moves, and it feels pretty good. So the bearings on the swing arm are still pretty good. So next, back to the front of the bike, and I'm still removing the front end of the bike. This means removing the triple tree. The triple tree is essentially the steering column in the front of the bike. So I'm removing this one big nut there. That's a 30mm. And after removing that big nut there's this bolt here that kind of clamps it together. And so it's important here in this stage that I remove these because we're going to rebuild we need to completely strip the frame, which means we need to remove this. And so this is a pretty easy to remove. You can see that top bolt with that the impact driver helped quite a bit. And now the top piece of the steering column just kind of slides up very easily. I was very surprised actually how easy that was. And next we need to remove the other nut that is attached to the steering column. I was extremely surprised on how easy it was to remove this. You can see here in the video, I'm just kind of using in my hand to, it was less than finger tight there because I was just barely touching it and it was coming undone there. So this piece was definitely loosened way too much. This piece here I just removed. It kind of guards against oil and debris getting into the bearings. And it kind of holds the oil in the bearings, in the bearings itself. And I could not help myself here. I had to clean a little bit of it off. Once again, you can see how much dirt is coming off this. Quite a bit. And with that done, you're about to see something very, very similar. If you see my last video, this looks a little bit familiar, this shot here. So with that top bearing and the top piece of the the top piece of the steering column removed, we almost break our toe. You can see those bearings just drop down after I almost broke my toe. So this was a fun little process there to clean that up. Fast forward a couple weeks, here I am back in the garage, and I'm filming all of the parts in the garage. So I have everything laid out in the garage here: suspension, electronics, fairings, seats, everything just kind of laid out randomly. And I was just, carburetors on the table, a radiator in the bucket. Everything is just scattered around the garage. The wheels there, the tank over there, the old seat over there, a replacement seat. There's my almost broken toe.
All right, we're back in the garage here. Back from Harbor Freight today. Picked up this workbench. Very professional looking, very nice, very sturdy. The old table I was working on wasn't stable. This thing is very stable. Can hold up to 200 pounds or some shit, very high. And I've cleaned up the garage here quite a bit. A little more cleanup to do over there, but this is the status right now. I haven't made a video in a while. Right now, the frame is almost fully stripped. Just need to take off Everything is disconnected. I just need to take out like 2 bolts to take off that kickstand as well as the center stand, and then this little spring, torsional spring loaded lever here on both sides. So that's all I gotta take off for the frame. Then I can get it powder coated. Gas tank still needs to be sanded. The inside needs to be cleaned out with some sort of Rust-Oleum or some sort of product, like Evapor Rust or whatnot. These 2 boxes here and that tub, this is all the other parts besides the engine, which just has the cam or the valves off, those rocker arms. And I was just cleaning up the surface, getting rid of that old gasket there. I have replacement gaskets for everything. I'm still planning to do the triple bypass or quad bypass for the engine, which for this engine, because it's a 500 and it's an earlier model, pretty much all I'm going to do for this is just check the, I'll take off both covers, so the front and back cover. So I'll take off this front cover, check the oil pump, make sure that's all cleaned out, check everything in there. I'll check the clutch springs, disc. Then at the water pump, I want to change the main seal. Apparently this fails for the water pump main, or the pump main seal. So there's I have a part coming in for that. I'm going to need to bore out the diameter to fit in the seal that I bought. Apparently the seal, the only seals they sell anymore are for older model engines, which have a larger diameter. So that's going to be interesting. I might take it to a machine shop to get it done, or I'm going to use some sort of tool at home and be very careful. Unsure though. I've started sanding some of the engine, or started sanding parts of it just to see how it cleans up, as I have been doing, and it is cleaning up nicely. We also have the swing arm back here, which still has part of the transmission attached, so that meshes with the rear wheel. So I'm gonna also need to disconnect that. I want to get the swing arm powder coated, so I still need to remove some bearings actually in there. Not too bad. And the seats, I need to fix all those seats up, get those cleaned up. Radiator here, I need to paint. Wheels, need to change the tires, and I need to change the wheel bearings, as well as just clean up the wheels, do some sanding, more sanding, which I've been doing a lot of. Yeah, and this piece, I'm not going to use this. I have some of the other pieces over there, like the rear seat, I'm not going to use.
So now I'm just kind of looking over one of these pieces of the engine. This is the cover for the valves here, and I've been cleaning it quite a bit here, and it's starting to get a really good appearance. Mainly I've been using steel wool and some other sanding products, and it looks really clean. It's not perfect, but it looks really good compared to what it used to look like. You can see some of where the steel wool was used, and it kind of has a brushed metal appearance. It looks really good. Alright guys, that's pretty much it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and stay tuned for the next episode where I'm going to continue to disassemble the engine and then start to rebuild it.